All right, guys, welcome back to Brands and Banter, the podcast where we interview cool people from cool brands. But today I'm sitting with an icon, a mentor of mine, somebody who is legendary in the design industry. And trust me, you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody more legendary than Denny Gerdeman himself, the co-founder of Chute Gerdeman. So listen, I'm just going to jump straight into this thing. I got a lot that I want to ask you and talk to you about. But before I do all that, first off, do you ever miss working with us at all, or are you just happy to be retired?
Oh, I miss it. I miss the people. I miss the projects. Miss the camaraderie in the studio, the brainstorming. The thing I don't miss, quite honestly, is, I guess, running the business part. That's an essential part of it, obviously, but it just, the business just took a lot of attention and time. And like anything, there's ups and downs. But the part I miss, though, is just simply the people and watching them grow. It was a joy to watch the young designers grow into their own, and just watch them over the years find a partner, raise a family, send their kids to college. Those kinds of things. That was what really made Ellie and I happy.
I think one of the things, not to go off, too far away from the script here, but it's got to feel pretty good to know that you, being a co-founder of a business, have played a real strong hand in helping these folks get their feet under them and establish their roots professionally and build families and, get to those points in their lives. I mean, that's got to feel good.
Oh, absolutely. That was probably the most heartwarming part of it. Was it fun to work on projects and see these magnificent concepts get built? Absolutely. But, those are just stores or locations. But seeing people make lives out of it and have families, and it's their profession, their occupation, and they took care of their kids and their spouse and had a roof over their head, that was much more meaningful to us, to Ellie and I. That was what it was about at the end of the day.
Well, listen, we're going to talk a ton about the business. We've got plenty of time to do that. But first, I want to talk a little bit about you. So I want to go back to your early story and, long before you were even in design, right? So talk a little bit about your beginnings, where you grew up and kind of what life was like for you, in the beginning stages of just kind of figuring out who you are.
I guess starting out, I grew up out in the middle of the country, out in nowhere, in farm country. And my dad had a reasonably good-sized farm, several hundred acres, lots of livestock. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of heads of hogs and thousands of chickens and all of that. And I was a real farm boy. The fact that I somehow got into all of this is still amazing to me. But my dad told me early on, he said, if you have any brains, Denny, go to college, learn how to do something else. This is just too much work every day. Because we never took vacations. He was on 365 days a year, all day long. That's what it was. And fortunately, I remember that moment when he told me, go do something else, because I was the only son on a large farm. And I thought that was just my heritage. I was going to be a farmer. And I was accepting that fact. And all of a sudden, I had that freedom. And I thought, okay, now college, now what do I do? And when I first started school, I went to Ohio State, and I started off I didn't know anything about any other subjects or any other career opportunities. And I was good with numbers, so I'll try accounting. I did that for a year, and that just bored me to tears. And I had a friend who was in architecture at Kent State, and I saw him over the summer, and he was telling me about that. And I thought, I could always see things in my head, how things went together. I could always do that. So I'm going to try that. So I remember driving down to Columbus and changed my major over the summertime, and then that fall I started in architecture, not knowing a thing. It was just like a whole new beginning, and it was a struggle for the first 2 years, to be honest. I was an average student, but I knew how to put things together because on the farm we'd built a lot of buildings, so I understood that basic carpentry skill set. So I understood details. That got me through, and I got hired by an architectural firm here in Columbus, and we're doing a lot of work down in Florida on Sanibel Captive Islands, and I did that for a few years. And then we won the project of designing the distribution centers and main office for the Limited. And I was working on that project, and I met the man in charge of store design and construction. And he said, Denny, can you do some layouts and the architectural drawings for these? And I said, yeah, I'll try that. I've not done that, but I'll try it. I did that for a couple months for them, and every Friday afternoon I would take out the store that I did for that week and revise any red line revisions. We took care of all that. And about 3 months in, he said, would you like a job here? I'm going to offer you a job. Yeah, I'd like you to come in-house at the Limited. And I thought, oh, I love the energy of the Limited. That was just fun to me. And it was a thing I had never done before. So the next thing I knew, I was working at the Limited. And I was there a little over 3 years. And I did over 300 stores in 3.5 years. And I learned systems. And that was before computers. Everything was done by hand. And the thing I remember is I learned a process, and I developed a heck of a memory, because things were so fast-paced, didn't really have time to write a lot of things down. So I remembered phone numbers and construction managers all around the country. And all the area codes and phone numbers. Somehow I just remembered all those things because I had to. And but that was the best training I ever got in my entire life, was working there. I got my master's in getting stuff done. Yeah, it was because boy, I can count. I would say there's only 10 Saturdays a year I didn't go into the office just to clean up loose ends. So I'd start on Monday. I was ready to go again because there was just so much going on. And we've all heard the term drinking from a fire hose. Yeah. That's what it was like. But there's so much energy in that building. All the buyers and marketing managers and everything. I got to know all these people, and the Limited had their own jet. We would fly all around the country going to projects, and I just thought that's how people did things, got in a private jet and went. I didn't know anybody. I was so naive. I admit I was naive as could be. I was green as a pickle. But I learned so much by doing that. And once I got out, I got recruited by the duty company, which turned into RPA. I got recruited to go there and design specialty stores, because that's what I had been doing. And at the Limited, I had done so many stores, and I was the only division at that point. I was always going to be Charlie Hinson's boy, just because he wasn't going to go anywhere for quite a while, and I was ready for the next step. And that's why I took the job then doing private consulting in retail design. And I left the Limited, and 2 weeks later I was in Cape Town, South Africa. And I'd never gone overseas before in my life, and boy, that was a jolt, just to figure out international travel. But with that job at the duty company, and I did that for 3 years, and a lot of international work and a lot of different kinds of projects and different cultures you had to understand. That was a buzz. And that was my first 2 big jobs, was the Limited and the duty company. And then worked with Nexus for a bit, and then Richardson Smith, which turned into Fitch. And the best learnings I got, I remember from Richardson Smith, was the care they had for their staff. That was one of the biggest takeaways I have in my whole early career, was the care they had for their designers. Their team was priority one, and how they respected the designers, and how they didn't try to elevate people by the more successful you were with the designer, then you became a manager. So I learned that's not how designers' brains think to begin with. That's right brain versus left brain. And then through all this, I met Ellie, and we got married. And after we left Fitch, we started our own company. It was just time to go out on our own. And Ellie and I had worked together for a while prior to that, and we just learned she was very right brain, and I was kind of middle brain. And we just learned that's a good process, because I couldn't do what she did, and she had no interest in doing what I did. And we just were a really good team that way. And we decided, well, that's how we're going to put together all of our project teams in our company once we got it rolling. And once we started Chute Gerdeman, it grew pretty quickly. Once clients found out we were out on our own, work started showing up.
I want to ask you a little bit about, you on your way throughout your career, even from school to your first opportunity to your next, to Richardson Smith to, ultimately landing at CG, who were some of your influences along the way that really helped you and left an imprint on you?
My first boss was Phil White, very good with Aycock and White. He was a very good designer. He was doing things I couldn't even. He was a great designer. He could do things design-wise that I couldn't even think of. But he were dependent upon me. It was to put the details together to build it, and we were a good team that way. So I learned a lot from him, and I got confidence in being able to bring an idea alive. And the next one was Charlie Hinson at the Limited. He was my boss there, and Charlie was Mr. Teflon in a way that he wouldn't make a lot of decisions and leave it up to me. And I learned to, okay, just make your best guess and do it, because at the Limited, we were in, Limited actually really invented specialty stores. They came up with ideas that was so far advanced from anything that was out there. The other stores were very pedestrian in their styling, very very bland, if you will. And with the Limited, we started coming up with all the glass mirrors and polished stainless steel, just really clean, sophisticated, slick looks. And so we were inventing all of that, and I got confidence doing that and making decisions. And if I made a mistake, I just begged forgiveness. So because it was going so fast, you didn't have time to ask a lot of questions. And the good news is we didn't have any real budget. That was the best part. I thought that's how the world worked until I got into private consulting, and our clients all had severe, real budget restrictions. So I learned how to, peel that back a little bit. But that was, and then, like I said, with Richardson Smith, Dave and Dean really respected their talent and what they could. They wanted their designers to be best at design. Don't try to be a manager, because that was alien. It took their time away from being what they're best at, and they paid them well for being best at design. And they hired specific project managers to do the other things. And that's how we built our business at Chute Gerdeman then. And the reason I left Fitch at that point is when Richardson Smith sold to Fitch, I was the guy who was going to be heir apparent to take over the retail sector of Richardson Smith. And then Fitch came in. They brought their own guy in from England, from London, and took the role that I thought I was going to get. And I was disappointed by that. And then Ellie and I we had been talking about, maybe someday we have our own business. And that just seemed to be the right time to do that. It was crazy that we did it then, because we had a 2-year-old toddler, and I had a new house under construction and a house to sell, and I quit my job to start Chute Gerdeman with Ellie. And looking back on that, what the heck was I thinking? I would never recommend that to anybody. But within the first month, we were in the black. Once people found out we were on our own, work started coming in, because we both had good reputations from the outside prior. And one of our main client was Sara Lee Corporation. I was doing a ton of work. I did work with every division they had except Coach leather bags. And it seems like an odd thing that Sara Lee at once had Coach, but they did. And but all the other divisions I was doing work with, and I had a non-compete with Fitch, and fortunately Sara Lee bought out the non-compete and got me going. And first year, I remember doing $300,000 of business with Sara Lee, just myself and a draftsman. We were busy as can be, but that's how we built our business. And Ellie had a project she was doing in South Africa for a company called Woolworths, which is no relation to the U.S. Woolworths. They're kind of like a Marks and Spencer's out of the U.K., that style of store. But we were busy, and we started hiring people right away, and we thought we'd just have this little cottage industry in our house. That lasted about 6 months, and I had to get an office because we were running out of space. We moved into the new house and started our business all within the same month.
I think it's so interesting hearing you talk about you had a role that you thought was yours,
Yeah.
that you were going to roll just right
Yeah,
into,
yeah.
and it was taken away.
Yeah.
And even somebody with as much success as you have and the history and the story you have, you faced adversity quite a few times throughout your
Oh,
career.
yeah.
You know, I want to, and you took a huge risk in the face of that adversity to do what you did. You know, can you kind of talk a little bit about that? How some adversity throughout your career has kind of shaped and turned into become a blessing or a major lesson for you?
I guess I've always had this crazy confidence that I could, no matter, I always was able to do well thinking on my feet. And I always figured I'll figure it out. I'll make it happen. The only time that I really got thrown for a loop was when 9/11 happened. And we had 4 major clients, 4 big projects that literally stopped overnight. And we had, I think, 65 or 70 people in the office at that point. And everything, we had 4 big losses right then. 2 of them just totally pulled the plug. 2 came back like 6 months later. And a lot of the other ones, they just slowed way down. And that was the first time we ever laid anybody off, the only time we laid people off. That one broke my heart.
Yeah.
I remember when we made the decision that this is what we had to do to save the business. Ellie and I went out to dinner after that day, and I remember going to the restaurant, and I started crying. I just broke down. That one hurt so bad that I knew we were affecting people's lives by laying them off. And you have so much invested in them emotionally, just growing up with them and seeing them then be devastated by not having a job and worrying about their families, and but also had their other remaining staff that had to worry about. And quite honestly, Ellie and I had to worry about ourselves as well. And but we built back from that, and learning from that as a tough decision and building back. And then when the dot-com bubble burst or the housing industry burst, I guess like in 2008, the lessons from when the 9/11 happened, we applied to that the housing bust, and we didn't lay anyone off. We just trimmed salaries, and I think we trimmed for about 6 months, and then then the businesses all came back, and we kept everybody, and the staff was very appreciative. We had conversations with them about this the entire time, and that was nerve-wracking as well. But I knew they had a job, and everybody had to take a haircut.
Yeah.
And they were appreciative. They had their jobs. And I even had some business leaders around the city later on say, we heard about what you did, and we called that the Chute Gerdeman model, and we did that in our own companies. And so I got feedback later on, which at the time I just thought it was the smartest thing we could do to survive. And turned out the others adopted the same strategy.
Well, you know what? I think that says a lot about you, though, that you found a way to have the company work together and be selfless, in a sense, to make sure that everybody feels provided for as much as possible. Because the world is unpredictable, especially in business. I mean, you've seen 9/11, 2008. You know, of course, we can talk about 2020 because I experienced that, and like you said, trying to find ways to keep the team intact and to make sure people are cared for and thought of. I think that really just speaks a lot to the character and the culture that you've built over the years anyway. And that goes back to what you were saying in the beginning, really taking care of your team like Richardson Smith did, and that leaving a major imprint on you. Because I'll tell you, first time I met you, this is something that I remember, and you know how it is in life. We remember the little things. I was coming from a different agency where, I was kind of low man on the totem pole. And the first time I met you, you knew my name, you knew where I was at school, and you knew a little bit about my story before I had even had a chance to chat with you. And that left an impression on me, like, this guy really cares about his business, and he really cares about the people coming in and out of the door, And those are the things, again, like you said, doing what you can to take care of everybody, keep the team intact, and selfless acts, again, just speak to that culture, which I hope we're still hanging on to that. I'm trying to,
Yeah.
keep that alive and fulfill that. I want to talk a little bit.
That's not easy.
It's not.
You have to have someone running point on that. And that's, I think Ellie did a good job of doing that. She was the inside culture person. I was the outside guy shaking trees, finding business. And we relied on each other to handle those parts of the things. And then the people. The people are so important because that is your business. That's your culture, is the people. And I guess we learned early on that and I think that's both our natures as well. That was just valuable to us because we wanted to enjoy where we worked. We didn't want a sweatshop. I never wanted a sweatshop. Could we have made more money over the long term by being more rigorous with demands on how to do projects or whatever? That wasn't the most important thing to me. It was the journey of doing great work. We wanted the best designers we could find to do great work and inspire them and empower them to make decisions and make mistakes. Those kinds of things were important to us as a company.
Well, we'll talk about doing great work in a second, but I kind of want to go back to the beginning. So first off, obviously Ellie, co-founder of the business, a major part of getting it off the ground. Talk a little bit about how you two met and, even more information on the depth and the way you two work together.
We met at the old duty company. She was my project designer and I was the project manager. And she would do great design and I figured out how to get them built. And we enjoyed working with each other because we just had a nice camaraderie that way. And then she moved on to a company called Nexus, and I joined there because I knew the guy that ran it, and did that for a couple of years. And Ellie and I worked together and started dating and got close. And I was working in South Africa and met a man who was a diamond broker, and I ended up buying a loose stone from him, brought it home, and we just landed a project in Venice, Italy, or Mestre, Italy, which is right next to Venice. And I thought that's never going to be a better time.
Right.
And she was my designer. So I got the loose stone, came back to Columbus, and got it mounted in 2 weeks, and went over to Italy and took her on a gondola ride in Venice, popped the question, and the rest was history. And we then both ended up working at Richardson Smith and Fitch, and then Ellie quit for a while to raise our little girl. And then that's when we started Chute Gerdeman. She was doing a freelance project for Woolworths in South Africa and had some income. That's when I had the guts enough to, okay, I'm quitting Fitch and starting CG. That was the journey. It was at the time, it all seemed normal, but in retrospect, I look back on everything that's occurred. It's like a wild, crazy ride because the industry was young then, what we all did.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the beginnings in that era of retail, right? The 90s. I have a couple questions here, but first off, you're coming from a situation where there's no budget. You can basically design whatever you want. You're hopping on private jets. Give some examples of starting out with the business where you kind of got brought down to earth a little bit and realized there's different ways and standard operating procedures that these businesses need to run and design and think for the future.
Well, it was really good training early on when the reality slapped me straight in the face and said, okay, here's your budget. Clients will give you a budget. And I learned to make relationships with fixture manufacturers early on because that's where the money was spent.
Yeah.
And we wanted to make sure that fixtures were well-designed fixtures and they were going to do the job that the fixture is supposed to do to support the particular kind of merchandise we were designing towards in the store. And so I got to know all the manufacturers around the country. It ended up being one hell of a network. That was one of the smartest things, maybe the luckiest thing I did early on, as I learned what good resources were, how to utilize them, and depend on them. And they depended on us as design resources then as well to bring work to them. And we worked together on the numbers, and I learned how to do budgeting because I'd never had to do that prior. And I learned how to crunch the numbers, and I understood about Lighting design, that was kind of an interest of mine, was lighting, because fixtures and the lighting are the two most expensive things in the store. And I learned how to tackle those numbers pretty early on, fortunately. And clients, they expected you to manage the budget. And I learned it was a matter of self-defense after a while, because if the project got bid and it came in over budget, then it was on us to figure out how we're going to reduce costs. But I also learned that you got to shoot high on the design profile if you're going to break through and do something really good. That was important, to take it beyond what the client expected, and then you can peel back. It's easier to peel back than try to add more on. So I learned how to manage both of those scenarios, and it worked out well for us, fortunately, because we were known as really a creative studio. That was one of the CG's hallmarks. Was we were a really good prototype design house. We came up with things people hadn't thought of. We were inventors. That's how design was for us. We looked at ourselves as being the Edison studio of retail design. We thought through it. And part of the journey later on is I learned about how important brand strategy was, and also learned how important good consumer insights were. And we married all of that, and we started building our staff around the brand strategy supported by consumer insights. And that then empowered and informed design. Because we wouldn't design anything. After a while, you just learned we couldn't design anything without knowing why. I found out why was the biggest question, the biggest word to use in your vocabulary doing what we did. It wasn't the how or the what, it was why are you doing this? And that's what I think was one of the biggest questions for our clients. Why are we doing this? Why are you doing that? And what's important to your customers in that regard? And we had to find those answers. And once we had those answers, the clients really appreciated what we came up with.
Next thing I want to talk about here, let's talk a little bit about retail in the 90s. What was it like in the 90s? You know, are there things that kind of come back to you when you think about what mattered to the customer in the 90s, and also kind of what mattered to clients in the 90s?
Well, the 90s was an interesting period of time. That's when shopping centers were carpet bombing America. I mean, there were shopping centers just everywhere getting built. I mean, and they all looked alike. I remember that was the period of time I was doing a lot of work with the intimate apparel groups of Sara Lee. And we did 565 shop concepts, and virtually every department store in America. So I saw a lot of department stores. And I would take a photograph of the shopping center name, and I'd have to write down where the heck it was, because they all looked identical. The stores all looked identical. America at that time, or the 90s, was all the retailers were about scale. Because of all the shopping centers going in, they had to get them out there as fast as they possibly could. So production was high. And again, like I talked earlier about having relationships with the fixture suppliers and manufacturers. I was using a lot of people to make fixtures for a lot of different kinds of projects. And I can't say that any of the projects we did were that memorable. It was just about productivity and capacity. And we grew our business because there was so much being done that we did all kinds of projects, a lot of shop concepts, just because the retail, like the apparel manufacturers, were going to all these locations, and the shop concept was a big buzzword in the industry then, if you recall back to what that was like. And we did shop concepts from Ralph Lauren to Champion Athletic Apparel to all the intimate apparel brands, and you name it, we were doing it. Health products, nutraceuticals they were called, which is vitamins. Worked with this manufacturer out of Tuscan, California. I remember they were getting all their supplies in China and bringing them in and making the product, and we were developed the bottles, the packaging, the fixtures, all the copywriting and the graphics that went on. It was really very comprehensive. But it was fun because it was like, how many things can you do differently? And all shop concepts had to be different. And by the end of the 90s, the manufacturers, and I think the retailers kind of hit the wall because the retailers, the department store groups realized they didn't own the store anymore. It was the manufacturers that were starting to have the identity in the stores and not the retailer themselves. So it did a 180. And at the end of that decade, it started turning back to, the department stores owning it, and that's when the manufacturers started getting into the outlet centers. All the cycles of the decades were just really kind of interesting how they progressed.
I want to touch on the scale thing here in a second because there might be a parallel with that in current day right now. But I want to ask you about specifically any projects that come to mind that you feel that you worked on that were innovative and kind of ahead of their time in the 90s.
I think that one project that we did for the nutraceuticals, we came up with a name and all that I thought was innovative because the best department stores wanted that as a brand, and we put it in a lot of locations. I remember we did a lot of work with Champion Athletic Apparel, and that was fun. I remember it wasn't so much innovative as it just was fun. I enjoyed sports, so I got to get into all these various sporting goods companies, and even one day we're doing the team store at the Boston Gardens. And I'm digressing here a bit, but the manager of the store says, "Denny, let's go upstairs. There's going to be some kind of an announcement." So we went up to the third floor of the Boston Gardens, the old gardens. And I was sitting about 20 feet from Larry Bird, and he was announcing his retirement. I have photographs. That was kind of cool seeing him in Auerbach sitting there with his cigar, and Larry said, "I'm done." And that was just kind of one of those momentous things that just happened by total accident. But like all the years we traveled and did things, both in the U.S. and around the world, and there's all kinds of stories about unexpected moments that occur that just make kind of a rich history of this industry. This was an absolute fun industry to be in. I enjoyed the heck out of my career. I had fun. That's why it lasted so long. So I just enjoyed it. The clients, the projects, and the people. I didn't want to quit.
Well, I can't blame you because the work that we do is insane, and it touches a lot of people on the other side, and we get to work with amazing brands and see a lot of the world and do some fascinating stuff. And I'm gonna transition us into the 2000s now, where there's some amazing work that CG did in that decade. I think kind of transformative to retail. But before we get in there, I want to talk a little bit about the business growing from a service standpoint. So heading into the 2000s, you've been operating for over 10 years. You've got a team now. It's a little bit bigger of an operation than just working in the house. Can you kind of talk a little bit about the services that you and your team started to offer? Did it grow a little bit, or did you really zero in your focus on what you wanted to offer retailers?
Well, we started, like I said, in our house. That lasted about 6 months, and we got a small office up in the Dublin area, and that lasted about 9 months, and we outgrew it because we were sharing an office with someone, and we started growing because once we got out, people knew we were out on our own. Work started coming in, and it was a lot of early shop concepts, and it just required people to do that kind of work, the layouts and sourcing and project management. And we took a space downtown in the Flatiron Building, and right off Nationwide Boulevard. And we stayed in that space a solid 10 years, and we grew. We doubled the size of that space for us. And it just kept growing, and we got a good reputation for what we were doing. We won a lot of design awards early on, which was interesting for a young company. But we always paid attention to having really good designers, and we put effort into understanding how to build the brand. That was somehow or another early on. I understand that building a brand and recognition and visibility was important. It just wasn't like some grand scheme. It became an awareness, and that's what I did. And I remember meeting up with the editors of the various magazines and getting to know them well. And I'd go to all the retail events. I'd spend all the events are always on weekends, so I spent a lot of weekends traveling and doing these things and building the brand. And I did it myself because I didn't want our design team that we had at that point to be away from home and their families. I just took it on. And it turned out that was the right thing, because I got to know the editors and they knew us, and I'd talk about our projects, and we got things published. And recognition started happening once you got your things into magazines. The retailers saw it and clients saw it, and the word of mouth got around and things started coming in the early 2000s. We were getting opportunities for a lot of really great brands. I remember the first real big one we got was M&M stores in Times Square. And but we did an M&M store in Orlando first. And I remember that was a interesting pitch to win that one. But then we got the one in Times Square. And that's when I felt like, my God, we have arrived as a company. We made Times Square, and I never thought in my wildest dreams we would ever do anything like that in New York City.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the pitch process for that project, because you've talked to me offline about it, and you told me it was pretty crazy. But I think it would be good for folks to hear how much attention to detail and how much effort went into working with M&M's and Mars to really get that project off the ground.
Well, we found out through the conversation we had early from when the RFP came in, and it wasn't really an RFP, to be honest. It was just a phone call. They had seen our work, liked our ideas, and so we had an idea that they're really looking for creativity. And the first meeting was in Chicago in one of their chocolate factories. And I remember going in the front door of that in like west side of Chicago, and the chocolate aroma was like almost overwhelming. Man, this is chocolate heaven here. And but it was just myself and George Nauman, who was our director of marketing at the time. And I went in to meet their two key people. And it was just me on a little platform by myself, and showing the presentation of our concepts. And I didn't have a lot of projects that I showed. I really went through the thinking of the design, why we came up with these design solutions, how it was meant to affect solving the business problem that the clients had, or how it's going to portray their business in a little bit different light to their consumer. And I showed those projects, and then the presentation really started, or the interrogation started, I should say, because the client's name, the guy we were working, his name was John Howe, and he was a smart guy. He asked me like 110 questions, and they're all very detailed. And I just remember feeling, I could feel the sweat running down my back, because they're hard questions, but I answered them. And there's a lot of detail about process and how would you do this? How would you do that? Why would you do it that way? And back and forth. And he grilled me for like an hour. And I remember when that was finished, I was worn out, because like you're just so dialed in. And George and I left, and I remember getting in the car, and I could feel, when I sat down, I could feel my back was wet. It was like, but we got a call like 2 days later. We had won the project, and we got started, and it was so fun for the studio to because there were no holes barred on what we could do creatively. Yeah. And one of our key designers at that time, he's still at CG, Steve Borman. He was a cartoonist as well. And just the most creative, interesting things he came up with for the characters and the colors, the colors of the candy and the personalities of each color, and how to portray them in the store. And it was a joy to work on that project. And the client was fun to work with, and they were very appreciative. And I remember the store won Store of the Year. And our team was so proud. I was so proud of them, of what they accomplished, because it was so unique in the marketplace. It was so over the top. It was just a fun experience to walk in that store, and I would watch customers walk in and go, wow, you just see their eyes go everywhere. And then they found a site in New York City in Times Square, and it had been an old auto dealership, and it needed a lot of serious, a lot of structural work. And from start to finish, from the day we found out about the project, they wanted to be open by Thanksgiving. And I honestly don't remember the year. It's like 2002 or something like that. And there was a bonus for us if we made it by Thanksgiving for that big holiday weekend in New York. But 11 months was impossible. I mean, because all the preparation work that needed to be done structurally. We built floors and built mezzanines and everything that had to be done. And we missed it by, I think, 8 days. Mm. And I broke my heart we didn't get the bonus, but we got it open for the holiday season, which they didn't think was going to happen either, but we did it. And we pulled every string we could, and we ended up having to get escalators made in China because the domestic escalators couldn't get made that fast. They were like a year out. So we didn't have that time. So we found a manufacturer in China, got the escalator in, and then the union in New York didn't want to certify it because it was not made and domestically made. So they boycotted. They couldn't. So we had to get the mayor of New York involved with this union to go certify it. Got it done, got it opened, but then the escalator kept stopping. It was breaking down. And we couldn't figure out what the heck was going on because you have to, stop it, open up the whole floor, trip a bunch of switches and get it going. We flew the manufacturer over. So you got to repair this thing because it's breaking. It would stop twice a day. And it turned out the escalator was engineered for Chinese body weight and body size and not American body weight and body size because we had our size is like a third more body, and so there was too much weight on the escalator. It was tripping the switch to turn off because it was overloaded. So they had to adjust that mechanism, and then it was fine. But those are things you never dream about when you're designing a project. You just do the best you can to get it up and open and running. And I remember that was an unusual curveball, but we got it going.
That project is definitely an arrival moment. I mean, it's still operating at a high level, even on the.
I was there this past Christmas, and it was jammed.
And that's got to be the most expensive real estate for New York retail, is to be on Times Square. And they've been there and they've been a staple for years. And there's no doubt about it. It's amazing that CG's had a hand in that kind of process of retail history there. I mean, we've got multiple projects across the street from each other, which we can talk about that in a second. But, I want to talk a little bit about now that you're seeing the brand arrive and you've put a lot of the time in, and like you said, you've invested your own personal time to create and generate awareness and market CG. Talk about building the team a little bit. What were the traits you would look for in creatives or in folks that you wanted to be a part of the brand and to work with every day? What did you look for in those people?
What I learned early on is not every good designer is a good consultant. You have to have a personality, and designers have to learn how to compromise because not every idea is going to get accepted by a client. And I also learned that how you present your ideas is extremely important. Early on, we hired in a consultant to come in and work with our team and how to read body English from your client, how to listen to your client and mimic what they say and what they're talking about, how to project and speak, what words to use or not use, how your own body posture was important. Just things that they don't ever teach you in design school. And it was important for our designers to understand that because they're selling the idea. And I can swear I have seen great ideas not get accepted because the presentation was done poorly. And I've seen mediocre designs get accepted because the presentation was really good. There's a lot of energy and dynamic with what was going on by the presenter. And so the theatrics was somewhat important. Yeah. And how you presented yourself with confidence was important. That you believed in what you were doing. And quite honestly, our designers did believe in it because they knew because we had a brand strategy around the design, and we had an informed brand strategy because of the research we did on consumers. The designers knew what they were doing that was right, or they had confidence that they were going in absolutely the right direction. And we worked early on with our clients on how to start the funnel wide and narrow it down with opportunities and solutions. And we made the client a part of the decision process. And these are just things we learned over time. Didn't know that day one. Once you got the client involved with making decisions, because there's option A, option B, option C, narrow it down. They were part of that process. And at the 11th hour, they couldn't come back to you and say, nah, we don't like that, because they were part of the decision of making sure that they did like it. And because, like I said, I've learned early on, if they veto something later on, then you have to change it at your costs, because it's your hours. Typically, you worked on a fixed fee. Not many clients would let you just go hourly on things.
All right, so let's start transitioning into a little bit more of the present day, right? Where you make it out of the 2000s, you make it out of a crazy housing crash where you retain everybody and you keep everybody together. Again, adversity multiple times throughout your career, as a business owner, and then taking that leap to start your business. But I want to talk a little bit about the 2010s. So now you've arrived, right? You're working on projects like Whole Foods. You're working on projects like Target and Starbucks and Wendy's, Verizon, and FAO. How did you position CG's brand image to continue attracting opportunities like this?
I think that was important. Well, the one big one in that period of time was Verizon. We did 5 major flagships stores around the country for them. And each one was very unique to the region they were in. And we had, and I'm not exaggerating, we probably at any time had 25 or 30 people working on that project. And it was around the clock. It went on for 3 years or so. It was just a lot of work. Well, that floated the boat and covered a lot of sins for quite a while. And I think what our clients gravitated to us for is we offered a really full service from concept to execution. We didn't build anything. We were not a construction firm, but we managed the whole fabrication process and sweated the details all the way through, from all the graphics design and fixture design. We did the detailing, we were able to keep client's budget in check because we sweated the details in our design studio. We had 1 or 2 guys, that's all they did was work out the details on the fixtures and the store design itself, the architectural detailing. We made sure that we gave the clients the drawings. They were ready to go. There weren't going to be any surprises. And when contractors and the fixture suppliers got those documents, they could see they were tight drawings, and they gave our clients then good bids. They were tight bids because they didn't have to put in a fudge factor of there's a variable, because we don't have enough information. If there's not good information, then they're going to have the price higher just to cover their exposures. And we were pretty tight with all that. I think that's why we were attractive to a lot of people, and we had a good reputation in the marketplace. We were considered probably one of the top 5 creatives in our industry, and I'm very proud of that. It's tough to maintain that, to be honest, because when you're number one, everybody's looking at you. And I'm not saying we were number one because we were in a grouping. And when we started out our company, there weren't many people that were in our space. And when it all ended up, there was a lot of people doing what we did. So you always had to always get every year incrementally better. And so that was a challenge. And our staff was up for the challenge. I'd go through the studios and look at what they were doing and talk to them about their ideas and why they did this, why they did that. To a person, they were excited about their work. And there was a lot of pride that our designers had in being the best they could be. And it was obvious. It was apparent. And we embraced that. They're the rock stars. any studio is only good as the people they have, and you have to take care of them and let them know they're important and give them their due. That's how we grew the company.
Well, I think that's one. I think giving credit where it's due is always important because, these people, just like you're investing in to build them up, they're investing their time and their passion and their effort and their creativity into it. And I think you've nailed it right on the head. And I think this is really one of the number one differentiators about CG from any agency is the idea that the creative is the product, or these designers are the product, and you have to build an environment where they can be creative without those bounds. And then you can tie that together with somebody who can put those towards solutions, right? Okay, we've got a creative over here. Let me rein you in. I love your ideas. How does it solve this problem? You got to have that balance, but that's something you've been a master of and you've always found a way to do. And I want to actually transition that thinking into this next question. As your role became more and more senior, from you starting out actually doing the projects, being responsible for that output, to building a team and overseeing the team and managing, talk a little bit about that. How did your role evolve, and were you always learning new things as you continued to grow in your career?
Yeah, you started asking that question earlier, and I unfortunately got a little off track with that. But as we were looking for new talent, I would always get into how did they think. It's not how pretty the picture is; it's how did you get there? Yeah. Why did you make that decision? And show me the purpose. And whether they were doing final artwork on graphics, or they're doing the details on how a soffit went together, or the fixture design, or whatever, or the interior space itself, I wanted to know why they did that. And even young, like I worked with PAVE for a number of years, the president of PAVE, and I got to meet a lot of young design students. And they became our farm club, quite honestly, because I would see these students who were exceptional at whatever university they were at in their projects. And we hired a number of them just because I'd have conversations. And so, yeah, this one's a keeper. And we'd make an offer, and a lot of times they would come on into CG. And that's how we built really a great team, just understanding how they thought. Because in our space of retail design, because it's not a pretty picture. It's all strategy and psychology.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
No one knows, like, psychology. How is that important? Well, you have to understand why a customer is motivated, how you get them inspired. Nobody needs more stuff. We all have plenty of stuff. You just have to convince the customers they need this, and here's why. And it's the storytelling in the stores. I guess we learned early on about storytelling. We did work with Disney, and they informed us a lot. I had a friend who worked there, a design friend who worked there, and he got us involved, and that was a great experience. And we learned about how to put together the story, and we used that ongoing for a lot of our clients, like develop the story and the tagline, and here's why, and here's your customer, and here's what they aspire to, and how you're going to get them there, and build that customer's confidence that they can be that person. So it was just, it's like making a movie in a way. It was the whole process is really interesting. Being in those early brainstormings on any client project was just a lot of fun. It wasn't like there was no wrong idea, no bad idea. It just, you collected a lot of things and then sorted it out and narrowed it down.
So I want to talk a little bit about your career in retrospect now, right? So from, taking a risk to arriving and developing some of the most amazing retail experiences in the world. I mean, award-winning retail experiences, national press, international press, the whole 9 yards. Let's just kind of take a 30,000-foot view and a look of everything. When you look back on your career, do you think that you had a certain superpower, if you will? And if you did have a superpower, like a greatest gift, what do you think that was that you kind of were able to offer everybody, your team, clients, anybody?
I don't know if it's a superpower. I just always enjoyed people, and I could relate to people. I could listen to the client and understand what their needs were, and how to get to what the problem was. I enjoyed that, and I liked people, and I liked our clients, and for some reason we all got along well. And I don't know. It's kind of a hard question to answer, just because there was nothing ever done consciously. It just kind of happened.
Well,
I enjoyed it. It was fun. Maybe that's why it went so well, because I enjoyed it. It wasn't work. It was almost play in a way.
Well, I kind of have an answer for you, and it's an experience that I had working with you. So, you and I got to work together for about a year, and I was learning a lot working from you and, working with you. But one of the things that I always admired is you have a really, really great way about bringing everybody down to earth, no matter what executive you're talking to or no matter the situation. I remember we were talking to Sherwin-Williams, and you and I were on a call with Sherwin-Williams, and they were saying, oh, hey, we're working with one of your competitors. Do you know this company? And you were like, oh, yeah, we know them. They're great. But, if you give us a little bit of time, I think we can show you how we're better or how we can help you better. And I've always loved the fact that you can use plain speak in a way that just makes you so approachable and friendly. One of the times that you schooled me up, and I still use this, we had a presentation for the I don't know if you remember,
Oh, yeah.
but it was you, Lynn Rosenbaum, and I, and it was one of my first kind of pitch opportunities. And I think the pitch went great. I thought we killed it. And then we were going on a tour of and, I was green, so I was very excited and trying to offer as much information as I could about, we could do this, just spitting out ideas, giving it away for free, basically. And you pulled me aside and you were like, hey, listen, great job today. The pitch was great. I could tell you really put a lot of hard work in. You were like, can I just offer you one piece of advice? And I was like, yeah, of course. You were like, hey, this is the time where you got to listen. Just listen to them, hear them out, because they haven't brought us on or hired us yet. And that's when some of the magic's going to start. You're like, just take this opportunity to just kind of settle in and let them talk to you, and then we'll figure out where to go from there. Sure enough, the reason why this is a learning moment is because they took all those ideas and implemented them anyway. So we didn't get to do the work, and they ended up taking those ideas and doing things with them. But now, anytime I'm in a situation like that, I've actively moved away from prescription, for the past, 5 years. I think it happened 6 years ago when we did that. And now I'm like the furthest thing away from prescription, and I'm more about just listening and just trying to understand and relate. And you always relate to people so well. So, if I had to say you have a superpower, I would say it's probably that.
Well, the one thing that, as you talk about that, it comes to mind is when we were talking to FAO Schwartz. And it was us and another company, the last two standing. And they ended up choosing a boutique design firm in New York City that they really specialized in doing boutique kinds of retail, specialty apparel, high fashion stores. And they did great work. And the client called us on the phone, and because we thought, okay, either we're going to get it or not. So I had our team sitting on the phone call. And they said, Denny, we're sorry, but we've made a decision to go with the other firm. They're right here in New York, and we think their work is really good. And I said, I agree. They're a great design firm. They can give you a great design, but here's what they can't give you. And I went on to explain they don't detail. They just give you ideas and concepts, but there's no details. They're going to be done. And I said, your store is going to be very fixture intensive, very themed intensive. You got so many different brands in that store, they all got to stand out. And I said, well, that's what we do. We're best at that. And we can give you every single fixture detail that's going to be required for every different product type you're going to be carrying in the store. And they said, oh, really? And I said, this is what we specialize in. We've shown you their case studies of that type of work that we've done for M&M's and Disney and Universal and all those other kinds of brands. And I said, those are very themed, intensive kinds of stores. And we did all the detailing. And that's how the store, and they said, oh, we never thought of that. And they said, we need to discuss. They called back a half an hour later. We got the job. Pulled that one out of the fire.
That's, that was a buzzer beater right there, man. That's amazing. So, okay, so I want to talk a little bit about this. So you've been all over the world for your projects. Are there any spots, across the globe that stand out to you when you think back on your career and where you were able to visit?
Dubai was probably the most amazing place, just because it was like going to a stage set for George Jetson. Everything is so ultra modern, and so many things are under construction all at once. And it was such a different culture. That was amazing in that regard. I'd still left an impression. We've did a number of projects over there in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Qatar, but I would like to go back to Dubai. I haven't been since for like 15 years. The one that I remember distinctively was we had a project in Moscow, and I remember it was a Friday night. I'd gotten there earlier in the day or something, and that Friday night I went walking through Red Square like at 10 or 11 o'clock at night. 2 weeks later, I was walking through Tiananmen Square in Beijing on another project with a different client. And so back-to-back in those two communist countries and with projects. And that left an impression. And the next day in Beijing, our client took us out on the Great Wall and walked a couple of miles on the Great Wall. That was significant in my mind. But we did projects in all kinds of major cities around the globe, London and Cape Town and all over Europe. It was just growing up on a farm and end up doing all these things. I was pinching myself every other day that how is this happening? But it was perseverance. I guess in my career, in my life, if there's one thing that stands out that I know I was really good at was perseverance, not quitting. Things, you can't stop. You got to believe. And I think that served me very well because I'm average talent, but I had a lot of willpower.
Let me ask you this. Would you do anything different if you had to start over today?
I made mistakes. Sure, everyone does. That's part of business. But you got to learn from your mistakes. Would I do a lot of things different? I don't think so because the journey was so enjoyable. There's a lot of stuff I wish I could do over, but it's mostly on a personal side, just having the opportunity to spend more nights at home, I guess. Because the early years was a lot of travel. It was just hard work. You to get that 7 a.m. flight out of Columbus and get home at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and then do it again the next day. Do that 2 or 3 times a week in a row, and your body gets tired even if you're young. I remember, the travel, the jet lag, going overseas and coming back home, and it takes you a couple of days to bounce back. But was it worth it? Oh, absolutely. Just the memories, the fun of doing what we did, the joy of seeing our staff, seeing the projects built and working, and the customers going in. I remember we did a store for Hamleys in downtown Regent Street in London, and Hamleys was at that point probably one of the F.A.O. Schwartz and Hamleys were the two toy stores in the world, and Hamleys was the old one, and going in that store after we got it built. I remember this man bringing his little girl. He was on his shoulders, bringing her in, and she looked around, and she's like maybe 3 or 4 years old. Daddy, we're here. That one is seared in my brain. Like, we in America don't know how good we have it. And when you travel around a lot and see a lot of things, it makes you realize how fortunate we are as people. We're blessed.
Well, let me ask you this. So, let's round out to present day. Are there any brands that you're a big fan of right now? Maybe it's their product or their messaging or their stores. Is there anything on your radar that you're a fan of?
Well, I can't say there's anything I'm a absolute big fan of. There's one regret that I have. I always wanted to do work for Tommy Bahama. I like their brand.
Yeah.
I like I like the feel of the product and the styling. So I'm relatively casual in my life, and that one always appealed to me. I could never get them as a client. They were just married to a firm out in Seattle. They're based in Seattle, so I understand the fact they want to work with someone local. I get that. But I was always disappointed I could never land that one.
Yeah, I can understand. I can understand that. We all have our passion projects. I think if I could work with a brand, it'd probably be Guitar Center, because I think we could help them out a lot. And
We tried that.
we did, we did try Guitar Center. Guitar Center, if you're watching,
They were this close. They just didn't have the funding.
yeah. Well, but in another world, in another life, maybe we're helping them out. Would have been amazing. Okay, so listen, I know you're active. I know you're golfing. I know you're doing all sorts of stuff, traveling, going from here to Florida. What's next for you? What do you got going on for the rest of the year?
Well, we're in the midst of a major remodel in our house right now. So our kitchen is totally blown up. We've moved walls around. We have Ellie's Art Studio right now is our secondary kitchen that has a microwave and a toaster and a coffee pot. And our secondary for refrigerators in the garage. But cabinets arrive next week, and they'll be totally finished by first week of June. And then in the middle of June, we're going on a 10-day trip on the Rhine with some friends from back in my hometown. Going to go on a Viking cruise on the Rhine River and start in Basel and end up in Amsterdam and then wander over to Belgium for a little bit and then back home. And then playing some golf over the summer.
Well, you're busier than I am, man. So, well, listen, first off, I can't thank you enough for your time. I think you have an amazing story, coming from the farm to seeing the entire world and having such an impact on retail and the work that we do. I think it's something that I celebrate. You should continue to celebrate. And I think the industry definitely celebrates. And, for those who are watching this and you made it this far, thanks for hanging out with us. His story is obviously very captivating. We chatted for a lot longer than maybe even I anticipated. So with that being said, that's this episode of Brands and Banter, the podcast where we interview cool people from cool brands. Again, nobody as cool as Denny Gerdeman. But listen, if you're not subscribed to The Gist, you got to subscribe. That's how you can stay in the know with everything retail, everything design, and retail good news in general. And we'll stay in touch because we're going to see you on the next episode of Brands and Banter.
Max, thanks for the opportunity today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.